Hello everyone, it is Matt, and today is the resurgence of Wiser Wednesday, the series where I make you guys a little bit wiser about some of the best SFF authors that I think people should pick up. So I'm here today to cover an author that I'm very excited about. Is this video a ploy to get Simon & Schuster to send me an Ark of the Veiled Throne? No, that would be crazy. Why would you even ask me that? Yes it is. Speaking of arcs, however, I'd like to thank Angie over at Orbit Books for sending me a copy of Blood of the Chosen by Django Wexler. This is the book I wanted last video, and I got it, so I am stoked about that. And I'd also like to thank her for not, filing a restraining order. Also, this forces me to get back into reading physical books, which is definitely good for me. So in this video, we're talking about an under-acknowledged legend and staple of the SFF genre. This is a man who doesn't have many books attributed to his name the way Adrian Tchaikovsky does, but he has done so much work behind the scenes in terms of writing like 14,000 short stories and tons of translation work. He translated The Three-Body Problem, Stories of Your Life by Ted Chiang, aka the movie The Arrival, as well as many others. He's written a whole bunch of short stories like The Tourmaline Court, The Paper Menagerie, The Cleaners, etc. The man that we're talking about, if you haven't already guessed, is Ken Liu. And the series that we're mostly focusing on today, actually entirely focusing on today, is the Dandelion Dynasty. So before we get started, guys, can you go down below and make sure to like the video? I would really appreciate that, and it definitely helps me out. I've been noticing that on my past couple videos, so I'm going to try and include that more often. Dandelion Dynasty is an incredible fantasy series set in the fictional island archipelago of Dara, based on China and potentially Japan as well. Unfortunately, I'm not well versed in Chinese history or mythology, but I'm guessing, or it seems to me anyway, that this series takes great inspiration from things like Romance of the Three Kingdoms, the Chu Han contention, the Yuan shenanigans that went down, as well as the Jingkang incident, specifically in Book 2. That was very, very good. The majority of the reason I know any of that is mostly because of Guy Gabriel Kay and his Under Heaven and River of Stars. Speaking of which, if you are a fan of Guy Gabriel Kay, and those books specifically, I really think that you'd like this series based on its content. And if you're not a fan of Kay because you don't like his very, very beautiful, excessive to some, purple prose, then I also think you'd like the series because Ken definitely tones it down. It's more like a 65%. So I also think you should pick it up. So the Dandelion Dynasty is the sweeping fantasy historical epic chronicling the changing political landscape of the islands of Dara. There are many characters that we follow throughout this series, but the fulcrum, the main two that the first book anyway hinges on, are Kunigaru and Matazindu. Kunigaru is this very wily, charismatic, forward-thinking, ambitious bandit outlaw guy. And Matazindu, on the other hand, is this very stern but gregarious warrior. He's honestly kind of everything I hate. He's very hindy, H-I-N-D, honor, idealism, nobility, duty. I don't like any of those. But Matazindu is kind of the embodiment of that, in a way. These two men really couldn't be more different, but when a rebellion rises up, the two find themselves fast friends in the midst of this conflict. Soon enough, however, they each find themselves leader of opposing political factions that have very, very different ideas about how the world should be run moving forward in the future. The first reason to read Liu is because of his impeccable scene setting. I feel like he's able to create this really, really amazing world that just, despite feeling very fully realized, at the same time it does have this air that it's just kind of the background for this conflict in a way that makes me feel like I should really be seeing this entire story on stage, if that makes sense. I'm not sure if he's the originator of this term, but the first time that I really ever heard it applied or attributed to anyone was when the Grace of Kings came out. And the term is silkpunk. Silkpunk, it definitely has some steampunk elements, but without the steampunk vibe exactly. It has a lot of the cool, it has a decent amount of like interesting and innovative and just different from our world technologies. But it definitely does feel a lot more just like historical fantasy than your typical steampunk book normally does. But I mean, there are silken airships and dueling warriors on flying kites, things like that. I don't want to get too much into it because you see some very, very interesting stuff come up throughout the course of book 2. In book 2 specifically, you get a lot of discovery and innovation taking off in this world, and I really, really, really liked that aspect of the second book. The story really does feel like it should be some type of like play or opera seen on stage, and I think the thing that is responsible for this kind of nagging feeling that I have is the second point we're going to talk about, which are the gods. The gods of Dara are alive and well, they're real, and they have direct influence over the events in the story. They have somewhat of a framework for how they're able to interact with the world. They have these like general rules. However, they each have their own plots and schemes, and they're constantly creating alliances and betrayals, double-crossing one another, coming up with some very roundabout ways to make things happen and to interfere with this world, and they're constantly pushing the boundaries of the rules that bind them. If you're a fan of mythology, you'll definitely love this series. Specifically, Greek mythology is what it feels like to me. Just the way that these gods interact with each other, the way these gods operate feels very much like Greek mythology to me, in terms of the vibe that they have. And they're just kind of the element X in this story that contributes to this feeling that I have, like this should be a play or a movie or something. The character work is also really, really great in this series. The way that Ken writes and develops his characters is really nothing short of masterful. I'm a really big fan of some of the heartbreaking decisions that he makes as an author. There's this one part that I'll get to it. Interestingly enough, my favorite characters in this story are all women, but that is where we get to a slight hiccup. The Grace of Kings is a very male-centric story, and the women that we meet in book 1 are really mostly there just to amplify the men, and they don't have much agency of their own. Thankfully, Liu listened to the feedback from his audience and actually really, really implemented it going forward in book 2. To the point where the women not only are on par with the men in book 2, in my opinion, they completely eclipse them in the most fabulous way possible. I cannot express to you how much I love Thera, her girlfriend, Gin, Rosanna, I love Rosanna, and Gia. And some of the decisions that he makes with all of his characters, but specifically the women, had me gooped, gagged, plucked. I was plucked and fucked. It was wild. Book 2, it's so good. You really need to experience it for yourself. The last chapter of book 2, I was like, I was freaking out, but I am very excited to see the ramifications of that decision that he made in the Veiled Throne. So I am desperately hoping Simon & Schuster gives me an arc. Please, I need it. I really like his take on how to write prose. His stories kind of remind me of Guy Gavriel Kay, but like I said, he doesn't like turn it to 11 with the prose the way Kay does. He is more like a 60-65% of Kay. If you think about the poles of like Guy Gavriel Kay on one end and what I call utility prose on the other, I feel like he's a little bit off-center towards Kay. And he is definitely capable of like making you feel things with the scenes that he writes, the observations that he makes, the allusions, the metaphors, and even just the way he constructs a sentence sometimes. That being said, another little hiccup that I have to mention I could see being a problem for some people. I'll be the first to admit the first chunk of this book is a little bit jumbled. It just doesn't have the cohesiveness, like the cohesion that he later is able to create once he gets past that first little chunk, and I believe that's because he had only ever really written short stories before. Like, that makes sense. If Actually, when you really think about it, the first, I'm gonna say, I'm guessing here, but I'm gonna say maybe 100, 150? I don't know, maybe 200. The first chunk of the book, anyway. In a sense, it almost feels like it's a whole bunch of different short stories because it's just not cohesive and put together in a way that makes sense. You keep getting given these little snippets of completely separate, disparate stories that don't seem to relate to one another that well, and you're not really given the incentive or like the context needed to, actually invest you in the characters in that first little section. And so that is definitely an issue, and I do think that with the writing ability that he has, acquired over the course of writing the series, I think that if he edited that first chunk of book one and republished it, that would definitely like help the ratings and help more people get into it. But once you push through that, you hit just like this point where the story just takes off and brings you on this incredible journey where you're brought through all these twists and turns, you see some amazing sights, you laugh, you scream, and in the end you're just left with like this insatiable need to move on to book two. That's certainly what happened with me, and I was so upset that I had to wait for book two to come out. So I do think that this is definitely worth picking up for a lot of you guys. I'm sure that you'll enjoy it if you just get past that first little section. And, sometimes that's just kind of what you have to do with a book. I think it's so sad when people give up on a book too early and miss out on like this amazing adventure that they would have had if they had only bothered to push through and read, maybe like another 50 pages until the point where the story really takes off, There are so many books that I've had to come back to, that I've had to retry multiple times in order to finally get into. For example, The Wheel of Time, I hated it like the first 4 times, and on the 5th I finally liked The Great Hunt enough to finish it. The book Nomon is one of my favorites. That also took me like 3-4 tries, and I adore that book. So I do think that a ton of you will like this. But all in all, you guys, this series is incredible. And while book 1 is great on its own, book 2 is where it like catapults you up to this whole other level. It is impeccable. It's incredible. It's like a 6-star book. It's so fantastic, and I cannot wait to see what happens in the Veiled Throne. So yeah, I really hope that you guys pick up The Grace of Kings. That's book 1, Wall of Storms, book 2, The Veiled Throne, book 3. I don't think I mentioned the titles of the first 2 until now, so sorry about that. And if you pick them up, it's really the perfect time, because by the time you finish the first 2, the final book should be out. It comes out in November. But that's all that I have for you guys today. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you made it this far into the video, in your comment down below recommending me another author to do for Wiser Wednesday, comment below a dandelion emoji. Anyway, that's all I have for you guys today. Bye.